A former Navy SEAL thought he was only saving one tiny German Shepherd puppy. But 3 days later, the puppy's starving mother appeared outside his truck, freezing in the snow. She did not bark, beg, or attack. She only touched her baby once, then stepped back and looked toward the dark road. That was when Wyatt Kincaid realized love was asking him for more than rescue, because somewhere beyond that storm, other mothers were still locked away. Before this story begins, tell us where you're watching from, and if it touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Winter did not arrive in Pine Hollow, Maine, like an army. It came like an old hymn. It settled on the roofs of cedar-shingled houses, on the iron fence around the white church, on the bowed shoulders of the spruce trees that guarded the road out of town. Snow softened the woodpiles, buried the tire ruts, and made every mailbox look as though it had been forgiven for some small sin. By mid-morning, the whole town seemed wrapped in white wool, quiet enough that the church bell could be heard from 3 roads away, even when it only trembled in the wind and did not ring. Wyatt Kincaid lived where Pine Hollow thinned into forest. His cabin sat at the edge of a frozen logging road, its windows dark most mornings, its chimney breathing steadily into the pale sky. He was 51, tall and broad-shouldered, built with the compact strength of a man who had once carried more than a body should, then kept carrying things anyway. His face was clean-shaven, the square jaw and high cheekbones left bare to the cold. His dark brown hair was cut short, military neat, but grown just long enough to show he no longer belonged to anyone's inspection. Wind had roughened his fair skin, and his gray-blue eyes held the stillness of water under ice. People in town called him polite. That was their word for a man who paid on time, fixed his own truck, shoveled the end of his drive before the plow came, and never stayed long enough in any shop for conversation to turn personal. He was not unfriendly. He nodded to the pharmacist. He held doors open. He once repaired the loose railing at the post office, without telling anyone, and the town spent 2 weeks arguing about whether angels now owned socket wrenches. But Wyatt had learned the geography of distance. Distance from questions, distance from pity. Distance from the old life where his wife, Elise, had sung off-key in the kitchen while burning toast with the confidence of a woman declaring war on breakfast. Distance from the memory of a military working dog whose name still arrived sometimes in dreams, not as a bark, but as a silence beside him where a living body should have been. Loss had not made Wyatt cruel. It had made him careful. That morning he drove into town with 3 bags of dog food in the bed of his old pickup, and a list in his head that had only 2 items: donate supplies, leave before anyone tried to thank him. The county animal rescue sat behind the plow garage, a low building with green trim and paw print decals on the windows. A hand-painted sign near the entrance read, Oak County Animal Haven, though half the letters were rimmed with frost, and the painted retriever looked cold enough to regret volunteering as mascot. Wyatt parked farthest from the door. Habit, not fear. From the truck bed, he lifted the first bag of food onto his shoulder. The cold bit through his olive-gray tactical shirt, where the sleeves had softened and frayed at the wrists. His old combat pants, brown-green and worn pale at the knees, moved quietly as he crossed the lot. Snow squeaked under his boots. Somewhere inside the building, dogs barked in uneven waves, one high, one deep, one so offended by existence that it sounded like a retired judge trapped in a terrier's body. Wyatt carried in the bags one at a time. The lobby smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, coffee, and the faint metallic tang of winter boots thawing on rubber mats. A young volunteer behind the front desk looked up, recognized him only as the quiet man who donated every few months, and thanked him with the relief of someone who had been wondering how to move heavy things without losing a toe. Then Lyle Harrow appeared from the hallway. He was the rescue's new operations manager, though Wyatt only knew that because Pine Hollow liked giving job titles the same way it gave casserole recipes, freely, repeatedly, and without being asked. Lyle was narrow-shouldered, neat, and carefully pleasant. His steel blue polo bore the Shelter logo. His soft-shell jacket was black and clean, too clean for a place where nervous dogs, mop buckets, and fate often collided. "Mr. Kincaid," Lyle said, smiling with only the lower half of his face. "Appreciate the support. Food's moving fast this month." Wyatt set the last bag down beside the pantry door. "Weather'll do that." "It certainly will." Lyle glanced at the clipboard in his hand. "If you want a receipt for taxes, we can—" "No need." That should have been the end of it. Wyatt turned toward the door, already measuring the short path back to the truck, the road out, the quiet of the cabin waiting beyond the trees. Then a sound came from the small care room behind the lobby. Not a bark, not even a proper whine. It was a thin, broken thread of a cry, so small it seemed the building itself might swallow it. Wyatt stopped. Lyle's smile tightened by half an inch. "Neonatal intake. Rough case, but we're handling it." Wyatt knew better than to ask. Asking was the first step in a staircase. Men like him survived by not placing their boots on stairs they did not intend to climb. The cry came again. It slid under his ribs with the precision of a blade too small to respect. From the hallway, a woman in teal scrubs stepped into view, carrying a warmed towel. She was in her early 40s, with chestnut hair tied low, and a veterinary stethoscope, the color of dark red wine, hanging around her neck. Dr. Hannah Keene had the alert, practical face of someone who had delivered puppies at dawn, argued with farmers by noon, and still remembered which old dog in town needed soft treats because his teeth were mostly decorative. Her eyes moved from Lyle to Wyatt. "You're the one who brought the food?" Wyatt nodded. "That makes you the most useful man in the building right now," she said. "Congratulations. It's a dangerous honor." He might have almost smiled if the cry had not come a third time. Hannah noticed. Unlike Lyle, she did not try to fill the air with explanation. She simply pushed the care room door open with her hip. Inside, beneath a heat lamp, lay a blue towel. And inside the blue towel was a German Shepherd puppy, so new to the world that it seemed unfinished. The puppy was no bigger than one of Wyatt's hands, stretched wide. Its eyes were not fully open, its ears lay soft against its head. A faint black line ran along its tiny back like the first brushstroke of the saddle it might one day wear. Its coat was warm cream and shadow, its paws absurdly large for the rest of it, as if God had planned a grand animal and begun with the boots. The puppy trembled. Not dramatically, not like something in a story trying to make a point. It trembled the way a match flame trembles when a door opens. Wyatt stood in the doorway. On a clipboard beside the incubator pad, a form had been filled out in block letters. Found. Roadside box near North Quarry Road. Breed, German Shepherd. Type age, estimated under 2 weeks. Mother. Not located. Status, abandoned, abandoned. The words sat there looking official, clean, and merciless. Wyatt looked at the puppy again. Its mouth opened. The sound that came out was barely strong enough to be called a cry. Hannah reached in with steady hands. "He's taken some milk, but not enough. Temperature is better than it was. Still fragile." "He?" Wyatt heard himself ask. "Likely male," Hannah said. "Hard to tell much when they're built like a potato with opinions." This time the smile did break through. A small one, gone quickly. Lyle stepped into the doorway behind Wyatt. "We're short on foster placements, especially neonatal. The timing is difficult." Hannah's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. Wyatt saw it. Old training had taught him to read tension before words dressed it up. Lyle's voice was smooth, but Hannah's silence had weight. "I'm not a foster," Wyatt said. "No one's suggesting a long-term commitment," Lyle replied. "Just temporary stabilization. We're exploring options." "I've never raised a newborn dog." "That's all right. We can provide instructions." Wyatt looked at him then, really looked. "Instructions, don't breathe for it." The room went quiet, except for the heat lamp's faint hum. Hannah studied Wyatt for a moment. Her eyes were not soft exactly. They were too tired for softness as decoration, but they were honest. "He needs feeding every couple of hours. Warmth, help eliminating, monitoring for aspiration, dehydration, low blood sugar. It is not simple." She glanced toward the towel. "But it is possible." Possible, that was another dangerous word. Wyatt had built a life around avoiding possible. Possible was where Hope put on boots and tracked mud through a man's clean floors. From the hallway came the tap of a cane, then the rustle of a cloth bag. Mabel Quinn entered as if she had been summoned by the kind of trouble that required old women and clean towels. She was 74, short, round-faced, and bright-eyed beneath a knit hat dusted with snow. A brick-red scarf circled her neck. In one hand she carried a bag of folded linens, in the other a sewing book bound in dark blue fabric. "I heard there was a baby," Mabel said. "And I heard Lyle using his donation voice, which means someone is about to be talked into something." Lyle's smile went thin. "Mabel." Lyle. She looked at Wyatt, then at the puppy. Her expression changed, not dramatically, not with a gasp, but with the quiet grief of someone who had seen many small creatures arrive carrying the consequences of human decisions. Wyatt said, "I'm not qualified." Mabel set the linen bag on a chair. Neither are most parents, and yet civilization limps onward. Hannah gave a tired laugh under her breath. Wyatt looked down at the puppy. It had stopped crying. Its tiny body made small rooting movements inside the towel, blind and urgent, searching for a warmth it had expected the world to provide. For one instant, Wyatt was no longer in the care room. He was somewhere colder, louder, farther away. He felt his gloved hand pressed against fur, felt the terrible weight of arriving just after the moment that mattered. The memory did not come with images. It came with the absence of sound. No breathing beside him, no second heartbeat, no chance left to be useful. His thumb moved to the old analog watch on his wrist. The face was scratched. The canvas band had faded to a tired green. He pressed it once, as if time could be held in place by touch. The puppy cried again. Wyatt closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Mabel was watching him with the unforgiving kindness of women who have buried enough people to stop being impressed by a man's excuses. 72 hours, Hannah said quietly. Emergency foster only. I'll write everything down. I'll give you formula, bottles, a warming pad, my direct number. Mabel knows neonatal care and lives close enough to boss you in person. I do enjoy a mission, Mabel said, especially one involving men being humbled by milk temperature. Wyatt looked at the puppy. What's his name? Lyle checked the clipboard. We haven't assigned one. Intake number is... No, Wyatt said. The word came out calm, but something in it ended the sentence before Lyle could finish. Hannah waited. Wyatt did not know why the name came to him. Maybe because the puppy was small and stubborn. Maybe because it sounded like something that could grow into strength. Maybe because names, unlike numbers, asked a man to admit a living thing had entered the room. Nash, he said. The puppy did not respond. Of course it did not. It was too new, too cold, too busy surviving. Still, the room shifted. Mabel folded her arms. Nash Kincaid has a certain ring to it. Not Kincaid, Wyatt said quickly. Mabel's eyebrows lifted. Hannah began gathering supplies before he could retreat into correction. Bottles, formula, syringes, a digital thermometer, a small heating pad wrapped in flannel, written instructions in neat, no-nonsense handwriting. She explained each step while Wyatt listened with the grave attention of a man receiving coordinates for a rescue he was afraid to fail. Do not microwave the milk. Test it on your wrist. Keep him belly down when feeding, never on his back. Small amounts, slow. Warmth first, food second if he's chilled. Call if he coughs. Call if his gums pale. Call if anything feels wrong. Anything feels wrong, Wyatt thought. That covers most of my life. But he only nodded. By the time he carried Nash out to the truck, the snow had thickened. Mabel tucked an extra towel over the carrier and fixed Wyatt with a stern look. "Don't try to be brave with a newborn," she said. "Newborns don't care. They'll make fools of kings and Navy men alike." "I was never a king." "No," Mabel said. "Kings have people to warm their socks." For the second time that day, Wyatt almost laughed. At the cabin, the fire had burned low. Wyatt fed it 2 split logs, then set Nash's little nest near the hearth, close enough for warmth, but not too close. He arranged the heating pad as Hannah had shown him. He washed his hands. Twice. He read the instructions. Then he read them again, because the words seemed to change shape when attached to something breathing. The first feeding took 26 minutes. Nash fought the bottle, then found it, then lost it, then made a noise so offended and tiny that Wyatt stared at him in disbelief. "You're new," Wyatt said. "You don't get to be disappointed in my technique yet." Nash answered by dribbling milk onto the towel. "Fair." Outside, winter leaned against the cabin walls. The forest stood black and white under the moon. Wind moved through the spruce branches with the long, low voice of something ancient passing by but not coming in. Inside, Wyatt sat on the floor in his worn olive shirt and old combat pants, boots unlaced, shoulders bent over a puppy, wrapped in blue. The house looked different with Nash in it. Not happier yet. Happiness was too loud a word, too eager. But the rooms no longer seemed sealed. There was a bottle warming in a mug of hot water, a towel draped over the back of a chair, a notebook open on the coffee table where Wyatt had written 8:10 p.m., 11 milliliters. Slow. Coughed once. Watch. 10:05 p.m., warmer. Better latch. 12:15 a.m., complained like old Chief Petty Officer. At 2 in the morning, Wyatt woke before the alarm. For a moment, panic opened its old door. His hand reached toward the side of the bed. His body listened for threats that belonged to other years. Then he heard Nash, a small, thin sound from the hearth. Not danger. Need. Wyatt sat up slowly. The cabin was dark except for the red glow inside the stove. He pulled on socks, crossed the cold floor, and knelt beside the blue towel. Nash squirmed when Wyatt touched him, mouth searching, paws flexing against the air. "All right," Wyatt whispered. "I'm here." The words startled him, not because they were dramatic. They were not. They were plain, almost foolish, spoken to a creature that could not understand them. But the last time Wyatt had said those words with his whole heart, someone had not lived long enough to hear them. He warmed the bottle, tested the milk on his wrist, held Nash belly down, exactly as Hannah had shown him. The puppy latched better this time, pulling with a weak determination that made Wyatt lower his head and breathe through something tight in his chest. The fire clicked. Snow slid softly from the roof. And Wyatt Kincaid, who had spent years waking in the dark to make sure the past had not come back for him, stayed awake for a different reason. He stayed awake because a small life was still here, because the bottle needed warming, because the blue towel needed changing, because Nash, no heavier than a promise and no louder than a match flame, had brought a fragile command into the cabin. Not march, not fight, not endure, care. By dawn, Wyatt sat in the old chair near the hearth, with Nash tucked safely in the warm towel against his chest. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. His back ached. A smear of formula had dried on his sleeve. The notebook lay open on his knee, full of crooked times and careful measurements. Outside, Pine Hollow brightened under fresh snow. The world looked untouched. Wyatt knew better. Nothing was untouched. Not snow, not men, not small creatures wrapped in blue towels and delivered into lonely houses by accidents that might not be accidents at all. But as the first pale light entered the cabin, Nash gave one small sigh and settled deeper into the warmth. Wyatt looked down at him. For the first time in years, the silence in the room did not feel empty. It felt like something waiting to live. By the third morning, Wyatt Kincaid had learned that a newborn puppy could turn a grown man's life into a clock with teeth. 2 hours meant milk. 3 hours meant worry. 4 hours meant he had misread something, forgotten something, or committed some crime against the fragile republic of puppyhood. Nash had survived the first night, then the second, then the strange gray stretch of hours in which Wyatt stopped measuring time by daylight and began measuring it by ounces. Swallowed, towels changed, and the small warmth of a body still willing to stay. The cabin had not become cozy in any sudden storybook way. The sink held rinsed bottles. The kitchen table held Hannah Keene's instructions, now marked with Wyatt's square handwriting. One sleeve of his old olive combat shirt carried a permanent ghost of formula. He had slept in pieces. That was different from not sleeping. Not sleeping the old way meant lying still while the past paced through the room wearing boots. Sleeping in pieces meant waking because Nash needed him, because milk had to be warmed, because the heating pad needed checking, because the pup made a wet little grunt that might mean nothing, or might mean the entire world was about to end. Wyatt found the second kind easier to forgive. At 8:40 that morning, he drove Nash into Pine Hollow for the follow-up exam Hannah had insisted on. The road from the cabin descended between black spruce and birch trees glazed with ice. Snow lay bright on the ditches, piled high along the shoulders where the plow had passed before dawn. Pine Hollow itself seemed newly painted. The bakery windows steamed gold. The pharmacy sign blinked red through falling flakes, and the church steeple rose above it all, white on white, as if heaven had misplaced a spear in the snow. Nash rode in a small carrier on the passenger seat, wrapped in the blue towel Mabel Quinn had sent home with a note safety pinned to one corner. Not too hot, not too cold. Men are bad at warm. Ask your wrist, not your pride. Wyatt had left the note attached. It seemed safer. Hannah's clinic sat beside the old feed store, a narrow building with green shutters and a wooden sign carved with a cat, a horse, and a dog, who looked considerably more cooperative than most real dogs Wyatt had met. Inside, the waiting room smelled of cedar chips, antiseptic, and damp wool. A yellow lab with a bandaged paw watched Wyatt enter with the resigned nobility of a wounded senator. A barn cat slept in a basket on the reception counter, apparently employed as management. Hannah came out from the exam room before Wyatt had finished signing in. "You're early," she said. Wyatt looked down at Nash's carrier. He was awake. "That doesn't answer the charge." "I've been awake since 2. "That does." She waved him back. In the bright exam room, Hannah moved with the focused calm Wyatt was beginning to trust. She did not fuss over Nash. She did not coo at him as if tenderness required a special voice. She warmed her hands first, checked his weight, listened to his chest, examined his mouth, his belly, the faint stump of his umbilical cord. Her auburn brown hair had already loosened from its tie, one strand falling near her cheek each time she leaned over the table. She ignored it with the discipline of a person who had larger enemies than hair. Wyatt stood near the counter with his arms folded, though not tightly. He had learned in 3 days that folding his arms around Nash made the puppy settle. Folding them in public made people assume he wanted distance. Both were true, often enough to be useful. Hannah compared Nash's weight to the number on her chart. "He's up," she said. Wyatt released a breath before he knew he had been holding it. "Not by much," she added, "but up is up." "I'll take up." "You should. Up is underappreciated." She turned Nash gently, inspecting the tiny belly and the dark thread of fur beginning along his back. Her fingers paused near the umbilical area. Not long, not dramatically. But Wyatt saw the pause because his mind was a house built around pauses. "What?" he asked. Hannah did not answer at once. She reached for a small light, angled it, and looked closer. The cord was cut clean. "That's bad?" "Not bad by itself." Her tone stayed level, but her eyes narrowed. "Just specific." Wyatt waited. A puppy born outdoors, abandoned in a box, exposed to cold for any meaningful amount of time, usually tells a rougher story. Dirt, infection risk, tissue damage, sometimes frost injury if the weather's bad enough. She ran a thumb lightly along Nash's tiny chest. He was cold and weak, yes, but not as cold as he should have been if he spent long outside. And this, she nodded toward the cord, this looks like someone intervened. Someone helped him? Someone handled him. The difference landed quietly. Wyatt looked at Nash. The puppy's eyes were still mostly sealed against the world. His paws flexed once, needing air. Hannah stepped back and made a note in the chart. "I'm not saying anything official yet. Newborns are complicated. Timelines get messy. People panic. A finder might have tried to help and done a decent job before bringing him in." "You don't sound like you believe that." "I sound like a veterinarian who has learned not to accuse a room before I know where the doors are." That Wyatt understood. The clinic window rattled softly as wind pushed snow against the glass. Hannah capped her pen, then looked at the blue towel around Nash. "That towel come from the shelter?" Wyatt glanced down. "Mabel sent it home." "This one, yes." Hannah touched the corner where Mabel's note was pinned. "But the first towel? The one he came in with?" "Blue, too." "I'll ask to see it." Wyatt said nothing. Hannah's mouth tightened, not in anger exactly, but in calculation. "For now, keep doing what you're doing. Feeding schedule is working. He needs quiet, warmth, no visitors, and if Lyle calls asking whether you're ready to return him early, tell him the pup remains under medical observation." "Is he likely to call?" "He likes inventory where he can see it." There it was again. Not an accusation, not yet, but not nothing. Wyatt lifted Nash back into the carrier with more care than grace. "You think the shelter missed something." "I think Nash is alive because several things happened in the right order," Hannah said, "and I don't yet know who arranged that order." The sentence followed Wyatt out of the exam room. He paid at the front, though Hannah had tried to wave him off and call it a rescue follow-up. Wyatt did not argue with doctors about medicine. He did argue about bills. The barn cat opened one yellow eye as he signed the receipt, judged him uninteresting, and returned to whatever Empire cats rule in sleep. Outside, snow had thickened. Not a storm yet, just Maine reminding everyone that winter was not finished speaking. Flakes swept across the parking lot and gathered on the hood of Wyatt's truck. The bakery down the street glowed warmly through the blur, and the pharmacy windows reflected strings of white lights someone had never taken down after Christmas. Pine Hollow looked gentle from a distance. Up close, every gentle thing had edges. Wyatt settled into the driver's seat and placed Nash's carrier on his lap for a moment before securing it. The truck cab held the smells of old canvas, cold leather, coffee, and warm milk. Nash stirred inside the towel, made one small sound, then quieted when Wyatt laid 2 fingers near his side. "Up is up," Wyatt murmured. Nash answered with a sigh so tiny it barely qualified as agreement. Wyatt should have started the engine. Instead, he sat there. He told himself he was letting the heater run, then remembered the engine was not on. He told himself he was checking Nash's breathing, then realized he had already counted it twice. The truth was simpler and less flattering. He did not want to move too quickly from this small proof of survival into the rest of the day, where doubts waited with clean shoes. The puppy had been handled. The towel mattered. Lyle liked inventory where he could see it. Wyatt touched the old watch on his wrist, then stopped himself. Time was not the enemy in every story. Sometimes the enemy was what people did while time passed. A shape moved at the far edge of the parking lot. Wyatt's eyes lifted. At first, he thought it was a shadow sliding between the snowbanks and the row of bare lilac bushes behind the clinic. Then the shape paused beneath the weak light of the side entrance. A dog, German Shepherd. Female, from the look of her frame, though hunger had cut her lines too sharply. Her coat should have been gold and black, but mud, road salt and ice had dulled her into a creature made of winter scraps. The black saddle across her back was patchy and uneven, like a burned cloak. One ear stood high. The other held a small tear along the edge. Her ribs showed when she breathed. Her paws were raw at the edges, dark against the snow. But what made Wyatt go still was not her thinness. It was the milk. Her belly, though drawn and painful-looking, still carried the unmistakable fullness of a nursing mother. Even from across the lot, even through the snowfall, Wyatt could see the truth her body had not been allowed to finish. Nash woke. It happened all at once. The puppy, who had slept through the receptionist's phone, the lab's offended sighs, and Wyatt's careful muttering, jerked inside the towel and began to root toward the passenger door. His cry was weak but urgent in a way Wyatt had not heard before. Not the confused complaint of hunger, not the thin protest of cold. This sound had direction. The shepherd outside took one step forward. Wyatt did not breathe. The dog did not bark, did not lower her head, did not bare her teeth or wag her tail or perform any of the simple signals people preferred animals to give when humans needed certainty. She stood in the falling snow and stared through the windshield with eyes the color of old amber held over flame. Nash cried again. The sound struck the glass between them. The shepherd's ears shifted forward. Her body trembled once, not from fear alone, from restraint. Wyatt had seen restraint in men under orders, in wounded soldiers refusing morphine until the next man was treated, in dogs trained to hold until a handler gave the word. But this was older than training, older than command. The shepherd's entire body leaned toward the truck, and yet she stayed where she was, as if she had learned that wanting too much near humans could cost her everything. The clinic door opened behind him. Hannah stepped out without a coat, her scrub sleeves bright against the snow. "Wyatt?" He did not look back. "Stay there a second." She followed his line of sight. "Oh," she said. It was not a soft "oh." It was the sound of a professional mind rearranging facts too quickly for comfort. Wyatt opened his door slowly. Cold rushed into the cab. Nash cried harder, tiny mouth opening against the blue towel. Wyatt lifted him carefully, keeping the towel around him, and stepped down into the snow. The shepherd lowered her head. Wyatt stopped at the front of the truck. "Easy." The word came out low, meant for her, for Nash, for the whole white world holding its breath. The shepherd came forward 3 steps. Her paws left faint red marks where the snow touched cracked pads. Hannah made a small sound behind him, half grief, half diagnosis. Wyatt crouched, not all the way, not looming. Nash squirmed in his hands, turning blindly toward the smell of her. The shepherd stretched her neck, trembling now, and touched her nose to the towel. Nash went silent, only for a second. Then he made a broken, eager sound and pushed his tiny head toward her. The shepherd's eyes changed. There are moments when recognition does not look like joy, because joy is too large for a body that has been starving. Sometimes recognition looks like pain finally finding its name. She licked the top of Nash's head once, so gently that Wyatt felt his own throat close. One lick, then she stepped back. Not far. Just enough to show she was not taking him. Not yet. Not from Wyatt's hands. Not from the warmth. Her body shook with the effort of that choice. Hannah approached from the side, slow and angled, her medical bag now in one hand. "She's lactating, badly inflamed. See the swelling?" Wyatt saw it now that Hannah gave him the word. The shepherd's underside was red, tight, painful. A nursing mother without her litter. A body still making food for mouths that were gone. Could she be his? Wyatt asked, though the answer was already standing in front of him with snow on her muzzle. Hannah did not insult the moment with false caution. Very possibly. The shepherd looked at Hannah, then back at Nash. She did not growl. She only shifted her weight, ready to flee if kindness turned into a trap. "Do you have a leash?" Wyatt asked. "In the clinic." "Food?" "Yes, but don't toss it straight at her." "I wasn't planning to insult her." Hannah glanced at him, and despite everything, one corner of her mouth moved. "Good. She looks like she'd remember." Wyatt stayed still. The shepherd lifted her nose, sniffed Nash again, then turned her head toward the road behind the clinic, not the main street. The side road where plowed pavement narrowed and disappeared past the feed store, the old garage, and the tree line beyond town. Then she looked back at Wyatt. The movement was small. A turn, a pause. Amber eyes through snow. Wyatt felt something inside him answer before his mind had finished building objections. "No," Hannah said quietly. Wyatt looked at her. "I know that face," she said. "That is the face of a man about to do something under the category of just checking. She wants something. She needs a vet. She needs both." Hannah studied the shepherd. The dog had taken another few steps toward the side road, then stopped again, waiting, though every line of her body showed the cost of remaining near people. Nash gave another faint cry. The shepherd closed her eyes for half a second. That was the moment Wyatt would remember later. Not the snow, not the first lick, not even Hannah's worried face behind him. He would remember the mother closing her eyes while her child cried from the warmth of another person's hands and choosing not to rush him because some part of her understood he might die if she did. Wyatt looked down at Nash. The puppy was warm, fed, alive. Because people had handled him, because someone had written abandoned on a form, because his mother was standing in a parking lot with bleeding paws. Wyatt's voice, when he spoke, was almost too quiet for the wind. She didn't leave him. Hannah did not answer. She did not have to. Wyatt turned enough to look at her. "Can you follow in your car?" "For a short distance," she said. "If she collapses, we stop. If Nash gets cold, we stop. If this becomes unsafe, we stop." "That's 3 stops." "That's medicine." The shepherd moved again. Wyatt returned Nash to the warmed carrier, securing the towel around him with hands steadier than he felt. Hannah went inside long enough to grab a leash, food, a thermal wrap, and her coat. When she came back, her face had changed. Less clinic, more field work. The red wine stethoscope was gone from her neck, replaced by a zipped parka and a medical bag slung across her shoulder. The shepherd waited near the edge of the lot. Wyatt started the truck. This time, the engine sounded too loud. The dog flinched, but did not run. She looked back once, saw the truck moving slowly, and began walking toward the side road. Wyatt followed at a crawl. Hannah's car pulled out behind him, headlights muted by snow. They passed the feed store, past the bakery's warm window, past two men loading salt bags into a pickup, both pausing to stare at the strange procession. A starving German shepherd mother limping through falling snow, an old truck behind her, and a veterinarian's car trailing like a witness. At the edge of town, the road narrowed. Wyatt kept his eyes on the dog. She moved with exhaustion and purpose, each step a small argument against the storm. Now and then she wavered, and his foot hovered over the brake. But she did not stop. She did not come back to the truck. She did not beg to be lifted. She had found Nash, and still she was leading them away from him. Only when the last houses of Pine Hollow slipped behind them did Wyatt say her name. Not loudly, not as a command. Mercy. The dog's right ear twitched. She did not turn, but she kept walking. Wyatt tightened his hands on the wheel and followed the mother into the white road beyond town, careful not to lose sight of the amber eyes that had carried grief all the way to the glass. Mercy did not run. That was the first thing Wyatt noticed once they left the last warm windows of Pine Hollow behind. A frightened stray might have bolted into the tree line. A starving dog might have circled back toward food. A mother, desperate enough to cross half a town in falling snow, might have thrown herself against the truck door until someone handed back what she had lost. Mercy did none of those things. She walked, slowly, painfully, with the straight-ahead purpose of a creature following a road no human had drawn. Her paws pressed into the snow at the edge of the lane, leaving small dark stains where cracked pads opened again. Every few yards she glanced over her shoulder to make sure Wyatt's truck still followed. Not begging, not trusting fully, just checking that the bargain had not broken. Wyatt kept the truck in low gear and held his distance. Nash slept in the warmed carrier on the passenger seat, the blue towel tucked around him, the little heating pad wrapped beneath a folded flannel shirt. Hannah's car trailed behind Wyatt, headlights softened by snow. In the mirror, he could see her shape behind the wheel, one hand steady, the other likely close to the medical bag she had thrown onto the seat beside her. The road narrowed past the feed store, then bent toward the old service lane that skirted the northern edge of town. Pine Hollow changed quickly there. The bakery smell and church bell gentleness fell away. The snowbanks rose higher. The spruce trees crowded close, black and watchful, their branches heavy with white. Wyatt passed Mercer's garage, an old cinder-block building beside a two-pump gas station. A security light burned over the bay doors even in daylight. A man in a gray cap looked up from shoveling near the pumps and squinted at the strange procession. A limping German shepherd, an old pickup, and Hannah Keene's small SUV moving like a funeral line for something not yet dead. Wyatt did not stop. Neither did Mercy. She left the main road near a rusted mailbox with no name on it and took a track half buried by drifting snow. Wyatt recognized the turn only because he had once hauled firewood for a widow who lived farther down that way. The lane led to the remains of a dairy farm abandoned years before, after the roof of the milking shed collapsed under ice and the family sold what land they could. The place had sat empty ever since. Empty places had a sound to them. Wyatt had learned that in countries where villages went silent before trouble arrived. He had learned it in warehouses, alleys, courtyards, rooms with chairs knocked over and meals left unfinished. Empty was not the same as unused. Empty meant no one belonged there. Unused meant no one had been there. The difference mattered. When the old barn came into view, Wyatt eased off the gas. The building stood beyond a row of dead apple trees, long and low, its roof sagging beneath snow. Weathered boards showed through peeling red paint. One side of the structure leaned as if listening to the earth. A smaller outbuilding sat behind it, half hidden by spruce and a torn strip of tarp snapping in the wind. Mercy stopped near the mouth of the lane. She lowered her head and sniffed the snow, then looked back at the truck. Wyatt parked before the clearing, not inside it. He killed the engine, Hannah pulled in behind him, leaving enough space to back out if needed. Good, he thought. She had sense in her bones. Nash made a small sound from the carrier. Wyatt looked at him first, still warm, still breathing evenly. The puppy's tiny body shifted inside the towel, then settled. Only then did Wyatt step out. The cold sharpened every edge. It filled his lungs, bit at his clean-shaven jaw, crept under the frayed cuffs of his olive gray shirt despite the canvas jacket he had pulled over it. Snow ticked against the shoulders of his coat. His boots sank an inch into the crust. Hannah came up beside him, parka zipped to her chin, medical bag in hand. "She shouldn't be walking this far," Hannah said. "No?" "She knows that?" Wyatt watched Mercy limp toward the barn. "I don't think knowing has anything to do with it." The dog went only as far as the first apple tree, then stopped. She did not approach the door. She stood facing the barn with her head low, body trembling in the wind. Wyatt scanned the clearing. Fresh tire tracks cut through the snow near the side of the barn. Not old tracks softened by yesterday's powder. These had edges, compressed tread, a wide wheelbase, likely a van or light truck. Another set overlapped near the outbuilding, angled poorly, as if someone had backed in fast and corrected late. Hannah followed his gaze. Recent? After the last snowfall. That was before dawn. Yes. She said nothing after that. Wyatt took out his phone and photographed the tracks from several angles, careful to include the barn, the lane, and the line of trees for reference. He did not step into them. He had known men who ruined evidence by needing to stand in the middle of it like conquerors. Mercy whined, a low, almost swallowed sound. Wyatt moved closer to the barn, not to the door yet, but along the edge where the snow had blown thin. The smell reached him before he saw anything else. Old hay, rotting wood, mouse droppings, and beneath it, sharper, bleach, cheap disinfectant, wet dog. Hannah smelled it too. Her face changed. Near a rusted barrel by the side wall, Wyatt found a black trash bag torn open by wind or scavengers. He crouched. Inside were clumps of paper towels, empty cans of puppy formula, and strips of fabric stained pale yellow-white. Milk. Hannah knelt beside him and did not touch anything at first. Her eyes moved over the discarded pieces, the way she had examined Nash's body. Not emotionally, but with a controlled anger that made emotion unnecessary. "These are whelping towels," she said. "From the shelter?" "Same supplier, same blue-edge stitching." She pointed with the end of a pen she pulled from her pocket. "Could be coincidence. Shelters buy in bulk. Clinics, too." "You don't like coincidence." "I like it fine when it earns its keep." Wyatt photographed the trash. That was when Mercy stepped forward and pressed her nose to one strip of fabric hanging from the barrel's rim. She inhaled once, sharply. Then she backed away, as if the scent had burned her. For the first time since the clinic, she made a sound that was almost a bark, not loud, not dramatic. But Hannah turned immediately. Wyatt did too. From inside the barn came an answer, a faint whine. Then nothing. The world seemed to close around that single thread of sound. Wyatt stood very still. Hannah's hand tightened on the strap of her medical bag. "You heard that?" "Yes." "Could be wildlife." "It wasn't." "No." She swallowed. "It wasn't." Wyatt looked toward the barn door. A new padlock hung on the hasp, bright metal against old wood. Too new, too clean? Whoever owned the place had not cared enough to fix the leaning roof, but someone had cared enough to lock the door well. He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. The boards near the bottom of the door bore scratch marks. Some old, gouged into gray wood by years of weather or animals. Some newer, pale raw lines where the wood had been opened recently. On the ground lay 2 pieces of kibble, swollen from meltwater. Wyatt's body knew what to do next. That was the problem. His body knew how to break a lock, how to enter, how to clear a room, follow sound, control angles, make decisions faster than fear. That old part of him rose with frightening ease, not wild, not angry, almost grateful for the simplicity of a door and something suffering behind it. He took one step closer. Nash cried from the truck. The sound stopped him. Small, weak, alive. Wyatt turned his head. Through the windshield he could see the blue towel in the carrier. Nash was stirring, perhaps disturbed by the cold, perhaps by Mercy's voice, perhaps by nothing at all. But the cry brought Wyatt back into the clearing, into Maine, into a day where breaking into a barn could endanger the case before it had even become one. Hannah looked at him. She had seen the step. Maybe not the memory behind it, but enough. "We need law," she said. Wyatt's jaw tightened. "There may be dogs inside." "I know." "Then law needs to hurry." "I know that too." Mercy walked to the barn door and stood there, shoulder brushing the wood. Her torn ear twitched. Her body shook so hard, snow fell from her coat in little bursts. She did not scratch. She did not throw herself at the door. She simply stood with her nose inches from the crack at the bottom, listening to whatever waited in the dark. Wyatt took out his phone. Deputy Orson Vale answered on the fourth ring with the sound of a truck heater blowing in the background. "Vale." "It's Wyatt Kincaid." A pause, not confusion, recognition being placed on a shelf. "What's wrong?" Wyatt gave him the facts in order. Mercy, Nash, the clinic, the fresh tracks, the abandoned dairy barn, the smell, the trash, the sound from inside. He did not decorate any of it. He had learned long ago that urgency did not improve when dressed in extra words. Orson listened without interrupting. When Wyatt finished, the deputy exhaled through his nose. "You on the property now?" "Edge of the clearing." "Did you enter the structure?" "No." "Don't." Wyatt looked at the lock. "If there's an animal dying in there—" "Don't," Orson repeated, slower. "Not unless you see immediate life-threatening distress and can articulate it clean. You break that lock wrong, anything we find gets argued sideways before it reaches paper." Wyatt hated that he was right. Hannah stepped closer so she could hear. "Deputy, this is Dr. Keene. I can document medical concerns from outside. I have visible evidence of a lactating female in poor condition and materials consistent with recent neonatal care. I also heard an animal vocalization from the structure." "Good," Orson said. "Photograph everything. Video if sound repeats. Stay out. I'm 20 minutes if roads behave, 30 if they don't. I'll also check ownership on the parcel." "County Rescue connected?" Wyatt asked. "Don't know, and until we know, we don't say it where wind can carry it." His voice was slow, gravelly, and steady, the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime arriving after people wanted miracles and bringing paperwork instead. But there was something beneath it, not doubt. Wait. "Wyatt," Orson said. "Yes." "You armed?" Wyatt glanced at Hannah. "No." "Stay that way." The line clicked dead. Hannah looked toward the barn. "I like him." "You've met him." "I like him more when he tells armed men not to be armed." Wyatt almost smiled. It did not last. They did as Orson instructed. Hannah filmed the barn from the clearing, then filmed Mercy's condition. The cracked paw pads, the inflamed mammary glands, the old rope mark around her neck where fur had been rubbed thin. Wyatt narrated time, location, weather, visible tracks, and the fact that they had not entered the building. Mercy tolerated the attention for exactly 19 seconds, then turned back to the door. Hannah lowered the phone. "She needs treatment." "She won't leave." "She may not have a choice." Wyatt looked at Mercy's stance. Every part of the dog leaned toward the barn, but her head kept turning toward the truck, toward Nash, back to the barn, back to Nash, a creature split by love. Wyatt understood that more than he wanted to. "She thinks something in there matters as much as he does," he said. Hannah's face was pale in the winter light. "That's what worries me." The wind shifted. This time the sound from inside came clearer. Not one dog, several. Faint, muffled, uneven. A whine, then a low thump, then the scrape of metal against concrete. Hannah closed her eyes for 1 second. Wyatt felt the old door inside him open again. He forced himself not to move. Nash cried from the truck, thin and hungry now. The feeding window had arrived. The clock with teeth had found him even here. Hannah heard it too. "Feed him. I'll watch the barn." Wyatt hesitated. "Feed him," she said again. "That's not less important." So he went back to the truck, warmed a bottle using the portable thermos, and lifted Nash from the carrier. The puppy rooted blindly, impatient with all adult tragedy, and latched after 2 clumsy attempts. Wyatt stood beside the open truck door, one shoulder turned against the snow, feeding a life that fit in his hands, while another life stood 40 yards away, refusing to abandon the dark. Mercy watched, her eyes fixed on Nash. For a moment, Wyatt thought she would come. She took 1 step. Then the barn answered with another thin whine, and Mercy froze. She looked from Nash to the locked door. Then she turned away from her pup and went back to stand at the barn. Hannah did not speak. Neither did Wyatt. There are kinds of love that look like holding on. There are others that look, to the untrained eye, like leaving. Mercy lowered herself in front of the door, sick and shaking, a starving mother keeping watch over a place that had taken more than her own child. Wyatt finished feeding Nash with his throat tight. By the time Deputy Orson Vale arrived, the snow had begun falling harder. His county SUV rolled into the lane without siren, headlights cutting pale tunnels through the trees. Orson stepped out slowly, a compact man in a brown sheriff's coat and black knit cap, his face long and weathered, a pencil tucked behind one ear, though no sane person would write outdoors in this weather, unless the writing mattered. He took in the scene without wasting a question. Fresh tracks, new lock, trash barrel, Hannah's medical bag, Wyatt by the truck with Nash, Mercy at the door. Orson pulled a small spiral notebook from his coat and tapped the pencil twice against the cover. "Show me," he said. They did. He photographed the lock, the tire tracks, the barrel, the fabric, the kibble, Mercy's condition. He listened when the barn produced another muffled sound, his expression changing only around the eyes. "Parcel belongs to a holding company out of Bangor," he said. "No active livestock permit, no registered kennel permit, no reason for animals to be here." "Can you open it?" Hannah asked. Orson looked at the door, looked at Mercy, looked at Wyatt. "Not alone on what I've got," he said. "But I can call animal welfare, request emergency review, and get someone with authority moving. If the vocalizations continue and we can document distress, that changes things." Wyatt stared at the lock. Orson's voice lowered. "I know what you want to do." "No, you don't." "Yes," Orson said, not unkindly. "I do. That's why I'm telling you not to make the wrong move for the right reason." Mercy began to shiver harder. Hannah went to her then, slowly, with a thermal wrap and a bowl of water. Mercy did not drink. She allowed the wrap over her back, but kept her nose toward the crack below the door. Inside, something scraped metal again. Orson lifted his radio. Wyatt stood in the snow with Nash bundled against his chest and felt the day gather around him like a verdict not yet spoken. They had found a barn with fresh tracks. They had found evidence of puppies. They had found a mother who had walked through snow to retrieve one child and now refused to leave the others behind. But they had not yet found enough. That was the cruelty of the line between knowing and proving. It was thin as ice, and everyone who had ever tried to cross too soon carried the sound of breaking with them. Mercy raised her head. For the first time, she looked not at Nash, not at Hannah, not at the door. She looked at Wyatt. There was no command in her eyes, no miracle, no language anyone could put in a report. Only exhaustion, only insistence, only a question that felt older than law and sharper than grief. How many more must wait because men need permission to be good? Wyatt looked down at Nash, asleep now in the blue towel, milk-drunk and warm against his chest. Then he looked at the locked barn. He did not move toward it. He stayed. Not because staying was easier. It was not. He stayed because if this was going to save more than one life, it had to survive the daylight after the storm, the signatures, the questions, the people who would try to make suffering look like a misunderstanding. So Wyatt stood in the snow beside Hannah and Orson, with Mercy keeping watch at the door, and let the first terrible shape of the truth remain just beyond reach. For now, Mabel Quinn's house stood 2 doors down from Pine Hollow's church, tucked behind a row of lilac bushes, buried to their knees in snow. At night, when most of the town went dark and the wind dragged loose powder across the road, her kitchen window stayed lit. People joked that Mabel kept a lamp burning so the Lord would know where to stop for coffee. Mabel said the Lord had better knock like everyone else and wipe his boots before coming in. Wyatt had heard that joke twice. It had sounded funnier before he saw Mercy lying against a locked barn door, too sick to stand straight and too stubborn to leave whatever waited behind the wood. By late afternoon, Deputy Orson Vale had made calls, filed his first notes, and requested an animal welfare review. It was not enough yet, not for a warrant, not for a proper seizure, not for the kind of action Wyatt wanted, the kind with a door opened and every hidden thing dragged into the snow where it could not pretend to be clean. So they went looking for memory. Not memory the way grief carried it, bent and breathing, memory with dates, memory with names, memory old enough to have been dismissed and careful enough to become dangerous. Mabel opened her front door before Wyatt knocked the second time. She wore a plum cardigan with floral patches at the elbows, a gray wool skirt, and fingerless gloves that made her look like a grandmother prepared to either mend a quilt or rob a very small bank. Her white hair was pinned in a low knot with a copper clip. The brick-red scarf around her neck still carried a few flakes from her last trip outside. She took one look at Wyatt's face, then passed him to Hannah's parked SUV and Orson's county vehicle idling at the curb. "Well," she said, "that is either a committee or a funeral. Come in before the neighbors decide both." The house smelled of starch, lemon tea, old wood, and something cinnamon adjacent that had been removed from the oven either too late or with great optimism. Quilts lay folded over chair backs. A basket of clean shelter towels sat beside the door, each one stacked with the squareness of a military supply clerk and the tenderness of a prayer. Wyatt stepped inside last. He still had formula dried near the cuff of his sleeve. Nash was back at the clinic for the evening, tucked into a warmed carrier under Hannah's technician's watch, while Mercy received fluids, antibiotics, and the kind of careful handling that did not ask forgiveness for being necessary. Wyatt had hated leaving both dogs there. He had hated more that he understood why he had to. Mabel noticed the way his eyes kept drifting toward the road. "They're at Hannah's," she said, "which means they are safer than any of us, because she frightens death by reading instructions at it." Hannah, unzipping her parka, gave her a look. That is medically inaccurate, yet spiritually satisfying. Orson removed his knit cap and stood near the kitchen table, snow melting on the shoulders of his brown sheriff's coat. He was not a large man, but he occupied stillness well. His small spiral notebook was already in hand, pencil tucked between 2 fingers. "Mabel," he said, "we need you to tell us exactly what you've seen." The humor left her face slowly, as if she folded it and put it away for later. "Then sit," she said. No one argued. Wyatt took the chair nearest the window. Hannah sat beside him with her laptop bag at her feet and a stack of photocopied records from the clinic in her lap. Orson remained standing until Mabel pointed at a chair with the authority of a woman who had served casseroles to widowers and made them eat. He sat. Mabel poured tea for everyone except Wyatt, whom she gave coffee without asking. "You look like tea would insult you." "It has before," Wyatt said. The smallest smile passed between them, then vanished under the weight of why they were there. Mabel set a dark blue fabric-bound book on the table. It was not large, smaller than a Bible, wider than a checkbook, its corners softened by years of being handled. A few threads clung to the spine. The cover had faded where thumbs had rubbed it open. On the front, stitched in white, were the words, "Needles, measures, odds, and ends." "Not very official," Mabel said. Orson tapped his pencil twice against his notebook. "Official things often lie better." Mabel looked at him. "That may be the most cheerful thing you have ever said." "I've had a long day." She opened the book. The first pages were harmless enough. Measurements for kennel pads, notes about fabric donations. Blue flannel from Mrs. Pike, too thin for winter. Repair tan blanket, room 3, chewed corner. Ask Lyle where new detergent is stored because the lavender one makes beagles sneeze. Then the notes began to change. Wyatt saw it before Mabel explained. The handwriting remained tidy, but the margins grew crowded. Names appeared beside dates. Daisy, yellow lab mix, arrived with milk, pups listed as 4. Pups moved? No form shown. Daisy gone Friday. Sable, black shepherd type, anxious, belly swollen, milk. Lyle says, behavior transfer. No transfer sheet. Mara, hound mother, cried all night after pups removed for evaluation. Not in kennel Monday. Mabel turned the pages slowly. "I started keeping more notes when things stopped making sense," she said. "At first, I told myself I was being dramatic. Old women are encouraged to think that about themselves. It is useful for everyone except the old woman." Hannah's eyes stayed on the page. "You reported this?" "To the shelter board. Twice." Mabel's mouth pressed flat. "The first time they told me Lyle had modernized the intake process, and I was used to the old way. The second time, they suggested I take a month away from volunteering." "For rest?" Wyatt looked at her hands. They were small, veined, fingers bent slightly at the knuckles, but they did not shake as she touched the page. "Did he threaten you?" Orson asked. Mabel gave a dry little laugh. "Men like Lyle don't threaten in the honest sense. He smiled and said it would be a shame if I lost access to the animals because I created confusion. He said donors get nervous when volunteers spread emotional interpretations." "Emotional interpretations," Hannah repeated. "That is what he called mothers crying for their pups." The room went quiet. Outside, a plow passed slowly, orange light turning the kitchen wall gold for a moment, then leaving it dimmer than before. Wyatt felt the old heat rise in his chest, the kind anger liked to wear when it wanted to pretend it was purpose. He kept his hands around the coffee mug. Mabel continued. Her notes marked Thursdays. Not every Thursday, but enough. A small T in the margin. A time, sometimes a description. 9:40 p.m. White van at back gate. No rescue logo. 10:15 p.m. Lyle and 2 men moving crates. Lights off in kennel hall. 8:55 p.m. Box truck. Rear plate. Muddied. Mother dog moved after closing. Thursday again. Why always Thursday? Orson leaned forward. You saw the plates? Once. Partly. She tapped the page. I wrote what I could. It was snowing, and I was looking through the laundry room window, which apparently makes a woman unreliable unless she is watching a pie. Hannah took a photograph of the page with her phone. Mabel, do you remember if any of these dogs had litters officially listed? I remember more than they wish I did. There was no pride in it, only sorrow sharpened into usefulness. Hannah opened the clinic records. Her brows drew together as she compared dates. Wyatt watched her move through paper with the same controlled precision she had used on Nash, on Mercy, on anything hurt enough to require truth. Daisy, Hannah said. I examined her on the 3rd. Mild mastitis beginning but stable. I recommended keeping her with pups and warm compresses unless complications developed. Mabel pointed at her own book. Gone on the 5th. Hannah pulled another file. Sable, I have a form here marked cleared for behavioral transfer. Did you sign it? Orson asked. Hannah did not answer quickly enough. Wyatt looked at her. She turned the form around. At the bottom was her name. The signature looked close. Not perfect. Not wild enough to be obvious. A practiced imitation, the kind meant to pass before anyone with the right memory looked twice. That is not mine, Hannah said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Mabel looked at her with sudden softness. I wondered. Hannah stared at the page. How many? She did not ask it like a doctor asking for numbers. She asked it like a person feeling the floor move under a life she had thought she understood. Orson's pencil stopped moving. Mabel turned 3 more pages. There were more names. Not dozens, not yet, but enough to make the kitchen feel smaller. Enough to make Wyatt see the county rescue not as a building full of barking and donated towels, but as a mouth with 2 faces, one smiling at Pine Hollow, one swallowing the mothers no one asked about loudly enough. Hannah stood so abruptly her chair scraped the floor. I signed a service agreement with them, she said. When Lyle came in, he said they needed streamlined medical clearance. I told him no transfers without complete exam records, no separating nursing mothers unless medically necessary. She pressed her hand to the back of her neck. If my signature is on these, they used you, Mabel said. Hannah looked at her. That does not make me feel better. No, Mabel replied. It was not meant to. Wyatt liked her for that. The kettle clicked softly on the stove as it cooled. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked with old-fashioned patience. Wyatt thought of Nash, milk-warm and blind, alive because someone had placed him in a box and called it abandoned. He thought of Mercy's raw pause, the way she turned from her own pup toward the barn door. Why puppies? Wyatt asked. Hannah closed the file. German Shepherds? Malinois? Working breeds? There's always private demand. People want guard dogs, sport dogs, breeding stock, personal protection dogs. Puppies with the right look bring money, especially if someone can claim rescue origin for sympathy and clean paperwork for legitimacy. Mabel's mouth tightened. And the mothers? Cost, Hannah said, bitterness cutting through the word. Medical care, behavior issues, recovery time. A sick nursing mother is expensive. A pretty pup is profitable. Wyatt stared at the table. It was not that he had never seen cruelty. He had seen plenty, but there was a particular obscenity in cruelty wearing the apron of mercy. People in Pine Hollow had brought food, blankets, spare dollars, old towels still smelling of home. Mabel had sewn warmth into fabric. Hannah had offered her name and skill. The town had given trust. Someone had found a way to sell even that. Orson rose. I need copies of everything. Mabel's notes, Hannah's records, the questionable forms. I'll contact Animal Welfare again, and I'll call the district attorney's office before this grows legs and runs off without us. That sounds poetic for you, Mabel said. I'm trying it out. Don't? He almost smiled. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression changed in the smallest possible way. The room felt it anyway. What? Wyatt asked. Caleb Mercer just called me back. The garage? Hannah said. Orson nodded. I asked whether his cameras caught traffic on North Quarry Road Thursday nights. He said he keeps 30 days of footage because teenagers keep stealing windshield wipers off junk cars and calling it a prank. Mabel blinked. That is a very specific crime. It's a very specific town, Orson said. He stepped into the living room to take the call, but the house was small enough that the others could hear the low murmur of his voice. Wyatt looked out through Mabel's kitchen window. Snow fell past the church, soft and steady. The bell tower was pale against the dusk. He remembered bringing dog food to the rescue that morning, only days ago, thinking charity could be simple if he kept it heavy, practical, and brief. A bag lifted. A bag set down. No attachment required. Now he was sitting in an old woman's kitchen with forged signatures, missing mothers, and a puppy whose life had become evidence before it had become anything else. Mabel followed his gaze. "I helped him," she said. Wyatt turned. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the towels stacked by her door. "Lyle, the shelter, whatever this is. I told people to donate. I stood in the church basement with coffee and cookies and said those animals were safe there." Her lips trembled once, then firmed. "Do you know how many little girls?" She stopped herself. There were no children in the story she needed to tell now. No easy innocence to borrow for weight. Only her own. "How many good people," she corrected quietly. "Trusted me?" Wyatt set down his mug. "You didn't build what he did." "No, but I helped paint it pretty." That struck harder than she meant it to. Wyatt looked at his hands. Formula still clung faintly near one fingernail, dried white in a crease of skin. His hands had held rifles, tourniquets, rope. Elise's hand when the hospital room had grown too quiet. A dog's collar after there was no dog left in it. Now they smelled of milk and antiseptic. He had spent years believing that being too late was the worst kind of failure. Mabel was showing him another, being useful to the wrong people. The back door opened with a gust of cold. Orson returned, phone in hand. "Caleb has footage," he said. 3 Thursday nights. Same box truck, rear plate obscured, one clear side panel. No logo, but there's a rental code. He's sending it. Hannah's eyes sharpened. "Can that tie to the barn?" "Maybe. Maybe not. It ties to the road. It ties to pattern. With the notes and forged records, it's more than we had this morning." "And the barn?" Wyatt asked. Orson looked at him. "I'm pushing. Animal welfare is sending an investigator in the morning if roads allow." "In the morning," Wyatt repeated. "I know. Mercy didn't think morning was good enough." "No," Orson said. "But Mercy doesn't have to make a case that survives court." Wyatt stood. The chair legs grated softly. Not loud, but every eye moved to him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mabel closed her sewing book and placed both hands on top of it. "You are thinking of going back there tonight." Wyatt did not answer. "That is not a question," she said. "It is an old woman recognizing a man who has decided silence is a plan." Hannah looked at him, not pleading, not commanding. Tired, angry, afraid in the way doctors were afraid when a patient needed what the world might not provide in time. Wyatt looked from Mabel to Hannah to Orson. "I'm thinking," he said, "that if they know anyone came close to that barn, they may move whatever's inside before morning." Orson put his notebook away. "That is possible." "Probable?" The deputy's silence answered. Mabel's fingers tightened on the sewing book. Then she did something Wyatt did not expect. She pushed it across the table toward Orson. "Take it," she said. Orson hesitated. "Mabel." "Take it before I become sentimental and decide evidence needs tea." Her voice was sharp now, but wet at the edges. "If this is going to matter, it cannot just be my little book anymore." Mott, the book sat between them. Dark blue, soft-edged, ridiculous almost, as an object meant to stand against men with trucks, forged forms, and locked doors. But Wyatt understood at once why the room changed around it. Mabel was not handing over notes. She was handing over the last defense against being dismissed. Orson took the book with both hands, carefully. "I'll log it," he said. "You'll return it." "Yes, ma'am." "And if anyone calls me emotional again," she said, "I want to be informed before you arrest me for language." This time Hannah laughed. It came out cracked but real. Wyatt did not laugh. He was looking at the table where the book had been. A rectangle of cleaner wood showed beneath it, the shape of something that had sat in the same place for years and had finally moved. Outside, dusk settled blue over Pine Hollow. Inside, the story had changed. It was no longer just a sick mother at a barn door, no longer just a newborn in a blue towel. It had names now, dates, trucks. Signatures that lied, a pattern moving through Thursday nights like a shadow with a schedule. Wyatt reached for his coat. Orson watched him. "Where are you going?" "To Hannah's. Nash needs feeding. Mercy needs checking." "And after?" Wyatt met his eyes. The deputy knew better than to accept no answer as innocence. Orson sighed, old and low. "Then we do this properly. We regroup at the clinic. We make calls from there. No one goes to that barn alone." Mabel rose with effort, one hand on the table. "I'm coming." "No," Hannah and Orson said together. Mabel looked offended. "I have been bossed by doctors, deputies, widowers, and one Pentecostal choir director with delusions of tempo. I am still here." Wyatt put on his canvas jacket. "You can help from the clinic." "I can help from wherever the Lord and my knees allow." "Mabel," he said, quieter. She looked at him then, and he saw the fear beneath the vinegar. Not fear of weather. Fear that if she stayed home, more names would be written in someone else's book. Finally, she nodded once. "Clinic," she said. "But I am bringing towels. Men make plans. Towels save lives." No one argued with that either. They stepped out into the evening, carrying records, copies, camera footage on its way, and one old sewing book that had stopped being a household object and become testimony. Across the street, the church bell shifted in the wind. It did not ring, but for a moment, as snow fell through the blue dusk, Wyatt imagined the whole town holding its breath around a truth that had been there for months, waiting for someone patient enough, old enough, and wounded enough to write it down. Mercy came into Wyatt Kincaid's cabin like a wounded queen entering a chapel she did not yet trust. Hannah insisted on helping carry her from the truck, but Mercy refused to be carried. She stood in the snow with her legs trembling beneath her, ribs sharp under the ruined gold and black of her coat, and stared at the cabin door until Wyatt understood the terms. Not lifted, not dragged, not taken. Invited. So he opened the door and stepped aside. The cabin glowed with firelight, amber against the windows, warm enough that snow began melting from Wyatt's boots before he crossed the threshold. Nash was inside already, tucked into his warmed carrier near the hearth, wrapped in the blue towel. When Mercy heard him, her entire body changed. Pain did not leave her, but it lost command for a moment. Her head lifted. Her torn ear twitched. A sound came from her throat, so low and broken that Wyatt felt it more than heard it. Nash answered. The puppy's cry was thin, but it pulled Mercy forward with a force no leash could have managed. She limped into the cabin, stopped 3 feet from the carrier, then looked back at Wyatt, as if asking whether this warmth had rules she did not know. "Go on," Wyatt said. The words were barely breath. Mercy crossed the last few feet and lowered herself beside the carrier. Hannah moved carefully, kneeling on the opposite side with a folded blanket and a towel warmed from the dryer. Mercy watched every motion. She did not growl, but her gaze tracked Hannah's hands with the intensity of a creature who had learned that human hands could separate what God had placed together. "Easy," Hannah murmured. "I'm not taking him." Mercy seemed to listen more to the shape of the voice than the meaning of the words. Wyatt unwrapped Nash and placed him against Mercy's side, careful of the swollen, inflamed glands Hannah had already warned him about. Mercy went still. The puppy rooted blindly, bumping against her belly, searching with all the urgency of life that did not care about paperwork, law, or evil done in clean buildings. Hannah stopped him before he could latch wrong. "Not there," she said gently. "Too inflamed. We'll feed him by bottle for now and let them have contact. Nursing may hurt her and could risk infection complications." Mercy's eyes moved to Hannah. For one terrible second, Wyatt thought the dog would interpret that as another theft. But Hannah reached into her bag, took out the prepared bottle, and handed it to Wyatt. "You feed him beside her," she said. "Let her smell him. Let him know she's here." Wyatt sat on the floor. He was still wearing his old combat pants, the knees wet from snow, his canvas jacket thrown over a chair, his olive gray shirt creased and stained with the small humiliations of bottle feeding. He held Nash belly down the way Hannah had taught him. This time, Mercy lay close enough that her nose touched the puppy's back. Nash latched. Mercy closed her eyes. The cabin changed around that moment. It did not become peaceful. Mercy's breath was too shallow. Hannah's medical bag lay open beside the hearth. Antibiotics, anti-inflammatory medication, sterile wipes, a thermometer, feeding logs, and emergency numbers had turned the room into something halfway between a home and a field clinic. But for the length of one feeding, the world held. Hannah examined Mercy afterward with the calm firmness of a doctor who knew kindness sometimes had to be inconvenient. Mercy was feverish, dehydrated, underweight, and in obvious pain. Her paw pads were cracked. The rope mark around her neck had rubbed the fur thin. Hannah cleaned what she could, wrapped what needed protection, administered medication, and wrote down instructions for Wyatt in a notebook already crowded with Nash's feedings. "Small meals," she told him, "several times a day. No rich food all at once, or she'll get sick. Plenty of water. Warmth. Quiet. Watch for worsening swelling, discharge, lethargy, refusal to eat, panting, trembling." Wyatt looked from Mercy to Nash to the page. "That all?" Hannah's tired eyes flicked up. "I can add interpretive dance if you want the list to feel longer." "No?" "Good. I'm awful at it." He almost smiled. Mercy did not smile. Mercy lifted her head toward the window. The wind had shifted. It pressed against the north side of the cabin and dragged snow across the glass in long white streaks. Beyond the window, the spruce trees stood like dark witnesses. Mercy stared through them, past the porch, past the woodpile, toward the black lane that eventually led back to town, back to the road, back to the barn with the new lock. Nash slept against the towel. Mercy rose. Her legs shook so badly, Wyatt moved without thinking, one hand out. She flinched, not from him, but from the possibility of being stopped. He froze. She limped to the door and stood there, not scratching, not barking, just standing. The blue towel lay crumpled near the hearth. The fire snapped softly. Hannah capped a syringe and looked at Wyatt. "She cannot go back out," she said. "I know." Mercy gave one low whine. Wyatt hated the sound, not because it was loud, because it was not. It had been folded down inside her until only the edge came through. He crossed the room slowly and crouched several feet behind her. "Nash is here," he said. Mercy did not turn. He glanced at Hannah. "She knows?" "Yes," Hannah said. "That may be the problem." By dusk, the cabin had become a place divided. Near the hearth, Nash slept in warmth, twitching now and then as puppies do, as if chasing milk through dreams. Near the door, Mercy lay with her head on her paws, eyes open, body angled toward the forest. Wyatt moved between them, heating bottles, checking Mercy's water, adding logs to the fire, answering Hannah's texts after she returned to the clinic to coordinate with Orson. Every task had a purpose. None of them felt sufficient. He wanted the world to shrink to this room, to Mercy's breathing, to Nash's weight in his palm, to the exact temperature of milk on his wrist. He wanted to close the cabin door and make a law out of warmth. What had reached him would be protected. What had entered would not be taken. What slept by his fire would stay. It was an old desire, wearing a new coat. Wyatt recognized it. After Elise died, he had tried to preserve rooms the way people preserve evidence. Her mug stayed on the second shelf. Her gray sweater remained on the peg by the back door through an entire winter, then a spring, then a summer. No one in the house admitted had come. He did not call it grief then. He called it order. Order sounded stronger. Order did not ask why a man kept listening for footsteps that would never come down the hallway again. Now Mercy stood at his door and refused the kindness he was offering because something beyond the cabin still needed her. That felt unfair. Wyatt hadn't asked for a cause. He had asked, if he had asked anything at all, for one small life to get through one night. Mabel arrived after 6 with snow on her hat and a soup pot balanced against one hip, as if she had been born carrying nourishment into emergencies. She pushed the door open with her shoulder before Wyatt could answer his phone. "I knocked," she announced. "You opened the door." "I was knocking with soup." She stepped in, took one look at the cabin, and nodded as though inspecting a battlefield that had chosen domestic weapons. Bottles near the sink, towels over chairs, medication on the counter, a German Shepherd mother by the door, a former Navy SEAL on the floor with puppy formula drying on his sleeve. "Needs more towels," she said. Wyatt took the pot from her. "That your medical opinion?" "That is my opinion on most tragedies." Mabel moved slowly toward Mercy, not directly, but in a sideways drift that made her seem less like a person approaching a frightened dog and more like a small weather system in a red scarf. Mercy watched her. Mabel stopped well out of reach and lowered a folded blanket to the floor. "There," she said. "No charge, though if you chew it, I will take it personally and recover emotionally in public." Mercy did not move toward the blanket, but she did not move away. Mabel considered that a victory. Wyatt could tell because she pretended not to. They ate soup standing in the kitchen because the table had become a command center of animal care. Mabel made Wyatt eat 2 pieces of bread and told him a man could not run on coffee, guilt, and whatever fumes came off puppy formula. He obeyed because arguing would have required energy he no longer possessed. For a while, the only sounds were the wind, the stove, and Nash's small, sleepy breaths. Then Mabel said, "I should have pushed harder." Wyatt looked at her. She was not looking at him. Her eyes were on Mercy. "I had the notes. I had dates. I had enough unease to keep me awake." Her mouth twisted. "But unease is not evidence," they told me, and I let myself be embarrassed. That is a very quiet way to be controlled. "You went to the board." I went politely. Polite is not failure. It can be when wickedness is rude enough to use it as furniture. Wyatt set his bowl down. Mabel's hands were folded around her mug. The fingerless gloves made her knuckles look older, more vulnerable. He had seen her sharp. He had seen her funny. This was different. This was a woman standing inside the ruins of her own good intentions. "I told people that place was safe," she said. "I looked widows and veterans and lonely men in the eye and told them their old blankets mattered. I said kindness accumulates. I said enough small good could build a shelter." Wyatt's gaze shifted to the blue towel near the hearth. "It can," he said. "Not if the wrong man holds the keys." The words landed between them. Mercy lifted her head as if the word keys meant something. Of course it did not, but sound carries shape, and perhaps she knew the shape of locked doors. Mabel noticed too. Her face softened. She wants back there. Yes? And you want to let her? No. That answer came too quickly. Mabel's eyebrow rose. Wyatt rubbed a hand over his clean jaw. His skin felt rough from cold and lack of sleep. I want to keep her here. Both of them. I want Hannah to deal with medicine, Orson to deal with law, you to deal with towels, and whatever is in that barn to stay outside my door until morning. That is an honest thing to say. It's not a good thing. Good and honest are not twins. Cousins, perhaps. They visit, but they do not always share a bed. Despite himself, Wyatt gave one tired breath that was almost laughter. Then the humor left him. I lost a dog once, he said. Mabel did not move. He had not planned to say it. He had lived years avoiding the sentence because people loved to ask what happened next, and next was a country he did not visit. He was K9, Wyatt continued, not mine, officially. His handler was a friend. We were on a joint mission, bad ground, bad timing. We thought we had more minutes than we did. The fire cracked. Nash stirred. Wyatt looked at Mercy by the door. I got to him, but I was late. Mabel's voice was very soft. And now, every locked door looks like a clock. Wyatt closed his eyes. There it was. Not comfort, not pity. Just the terrible accuracy of an old woman who had spent her life measuring fabric and could still measure a wound. Yes, he said. Mercy whined again. This time Nash answered in his sleep, a tiny sound no bigger than a thread pulled through cloth. Mercy rose. She took 2 unsteady steps toward him, touched her nose to the towel, then turned back to the door. Wyatt felt anger then, but not at her, at the shape of the choice, at the cruelty of being given something fragile and then asked immediately to risk the peace around it. At the God who, if he existed, had a habit of delivering miracles wrapped in responsibilities. His phone buzzed on the table. Hannah, Wyatt answered on speaker. I'm at the clinic with Orson, she said. Her voice carried the clipped pressure of too many things happening at once. Animal welfare can get someone here tomorrow morning, but the storm warning just upgraded. Roads may close after midnight. Orson's voice came in behind hers. Caleb sent more footage. Truck passed his garage again 40 minutes ago. Same route, northbound. Wyatt looked at Mabel. Mabel had gone very still. Hannah continued. It could be unrelated. No, Wyatt said. No, she agreed. I don't think it is. Orson spoke next. If they know that barn was observed, they may be moving animals tonight. I'm requesting backup, but weather is going to slow everyone down. Mercy began pacing at the door. Not wildly. 3 steps. Turn. 3 steps. Turn. Her nails clicked against the floorboards in a rhythm that made every human word feel late. Wyatt watched her. She stopped, turned her amber eyes toward him, and did something she had not done before. She walked to Nash, lowered her muzzle, and pushed the blue towel with her nose until one corner folded over him more securely. Then she limped back to the door and stood waiting. Mabel drew in a breath. Wyatt did not speak. He understood the gesture with a clarity that made his chest hurt. Mercy was not abandoning Nash. She was leaving him in the warmest place she had found. With Wyatt, the trust in that was heavier than accusation. On the phone, Hannah said, Wyatt? He looked at the puppy, wrapped in blue, then at Mercy. Then at the dark window where snow streamed like ash from a white fire. What's the plan? He asked. Orson answered carefully, as if he had been waiting for that question and feared all the wrong versions of it. No hero work. We document from a distance. Hannah comes with medical supplies. I coordinate with dispatch and animal welfare. We confirm movement before anyone intervenes. If they load animals, we have active exigency and witnesses." "Mabel stays at the clinic," Hannah said. Mabel snorted. "Mabel can hear you." "Mabel still stays at the clinic," Hannah repeated. "Nash needs someone who can manage towels and scents. Wyatt can't take him." "I was not planning to let him," Mabel said, offended by the suggestion that she might have permitted stupidity on her watch. Wyatt looked at Nash. The puppy slept on, unaware that a small council of exhausted adults and one feverish mother had arranged themselves around his future. "I'll bring Mercy," Wyatt said. Hannah was silent for one beat. "Only if she rides. She cannot walk that road again." Wyatt looked at Mercy. "You hear that?" Mercy stared at the door. "She's negotiating," Mabel said. "Badly, but with conviction." For the third time that night, Wyatt almost laughed. It helped, a little. They moved quickly after that, though not carelessly. Mabel packed Nash's feeding supplies into a canvas tote, as if preparing a duke for travel. Wyatt set up the warmed carrier near the hearth, then hesitated. Mabel saw it. "Go," she said. "He eats in 40 minutes. "I can read a clock. I was born before digital numbers started yelling at everyone." "He likes the bottle angled lower after the first half ounce." "Then I shall angle it lower and alert Congress." Wyatt looked at her. Her humor was still there, but her eyes were wet. "I won't let him get cold," she said, "and I won't let him be alone." That was the promise he needed. Not dramatic, not enough to cure fear, but enough to stand on. Wyatt knelt beside Nash and touched one finger to the puppy's tiny back. "I'll be back." He said it quietly. The words scared him. They had always scared him. Mercy came beside him then, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. Not leaning, not asking, present. Wyatt turned his hand and let his fingers rest for 1 second against the thick, dirty fur at her neck, above the place where the rope had marked her. Mercy did not flinch. Outside, the storm gathered itself against the cabin. Wyatt stood, pulled on his canvas jacket, tucked his father's scratched watch beneath his cuff, and opened the door. Cold rushed in. Mercy stepped forward, then stopped at the threshold and looked back once. Nash slept in the blue towel by the fire. Mabel stood over him with a bottle in one hand and an expression that could have frightened armies into punctual feeding schedules. Wyatt looked at Mercy. "We bring them home," he said. "Not him, not yours. Them." Mercy stepped into the snow. Wyatt followed, closing the cabin door carefully behind him, as though leaving a small flame burning in the dark and trusting for once that someone else could keep it alive until he returned. The storm took Pine Hollow by the throat. By 9 that night, the road beyond the clinic had nearly disappeared beneath wind-driven snow. It came sideways, hard enough to erase tire marks almost as soon as they were made, hard enough to turn every headlight into a pale tunnel with no promise at the end. The town's warm windows blurred behind white gusts, one by one, until even the church steeple looked less like a landmark than a memory. Wyatt did not bring Nash. That was the first mercy of the night. The puppy stayed at Hannah's clinic, wrapped in his blue towel inside a warmed carrier under the care of Etta Rowe. Etta had arrived with reading glasses hanging from a red cord, and the brisk irritation of a woman who had spent decades keeping shelters from collapsing under bad inventory, bad weather, and bad decisions made by men with clipboards. She had once coordinated the rescue before Lyle Harrow arrived, and though retirement had softened her schedule, it had not softened her standards. "If this baby loses 1 degree of warmth," Etta told Wyatt, "I will haunt you before you die. Saves time." Wyatt believed her. Mabel stayed with Etta at the clinic, though "stayed" was an ambitious word for a woman who kept pacing between the puppy carrier, the towel shelf, and the front window as if she could shame the storm into behaving. Hannah had argued that Mabel should not come anywhere near the barn. Orson had backed her. Wyatt had said nothing, which Mabel correctly interpreted as betrayal. In the end, Mabel agreed to remain at the clinic only after placing her sewing book in Orson's hands and making him repeat out loud that it would be logged as evidence and returned in the same condition unless the justice system wanted to explain itself to her personally. Then Wyatt, Hannah, Orson, and Mercy went into the storm. Mercy rode in the rear of Wyatt's truck, not loose, not caged, but settled on a blanket-lined space behind the seats. Hannah had wrapped her paws and checked her fever again before they left. The dog hated being lifted into the truck, but she was too weak to walk the old road, and this time Wyatt did not negotiate with her stubbornness. "You can glare," he told her, closing the rear door, "but you ride." Mercy glared. That, too, was a kind of agreement. Orson drove ahead in the county SUV without siren. Hannah followed behind Wyatt, her medical bag and camera equipment beside her. Caleb Mercer remained at his garage with the phone line open to Orson, watching his security feed and the road beyond the pumps. The state animal welfare investigator was trying to get through from the coast, delayed by weather and a jackknife delivery truck near Route 11. Backup was moving, but slowly. The storm had become an accomplice to anyone with something to hide. Orson's voice crackled over Wyatt's speaker. "Caleb confirms the box truck passed northbound at 8:43. Same rental code. Rear plate obscured again." Wyatt kept his eyes on the road. "How far ahead?" "Depends how bad they wanted to get there," Orson said. "In this weather, 20 minutes, maybe less." Hannah came in over the call. "If they're loading animals, we need documentation before they move them." "We document," Orson said. "We don't rush blind." Wyatt glanced in the mirror. Mercy had risen despite the motion of the truck. Her front paws braced against the folded blanket, head low, eyes fixed through the windshield between the seats. Snowlight flickered across her face. The torn edge of her left ear trembled each time the truck hit a frozen rut. "She knows," Wyatt said. No one answered. They did not need to. The old dairy road appeared suddenly in the sweep of Orson's taillights. Wyatt followed him off the main road, tires crunching over hidden ice. The trees closed around them, black branches thrashing white. The barn clearing lay ahead, half erased by snow. This time, it was not dark. A yellow work light burned near the side door. Another glowed behind the warped boards of the main structure. The box truck sat backed up near the outbuilding, rear doors open, one taillight pulsing red through blowing snow. Metal crates were stacked in the cargo space beneath a half-pulled tarp. Wyatt killed his headlights before the clearing. Orson did the same. For a moment, all three vehicles sat in the dark beneath the trees, engines low, storm roaring around them. Then a man crossed the light. He wore a black puffer jacket, head down against the wind, one gloved hand gripping the side of a metal crate. Another man appeared from the barn and helped him lift. The crate shifted. Something inside moved. Hannah's voice came through the phone, lower now. "Recording." Orson answered. "Dispatch is updated. I'm moving to block the lane." "Wyatt, you stay with Dr. Keene unless I call you forward." Wyatt looked at the truck ahead, looked at Mercy. The dog was already pressing toward the door. "Mercy stays with me," Wyatt said. "Mercy stays alive," Hannah corrected. Wyatt opened the rear door carefully. Snow blasted into the cab. Mercy stepped down with a stiffness that made his jaw tighten, but she did not collapse. He clipped a light lead to the temporary harness Hannah had fitted earlier, not to restrain her by force, but to keep her from spending what little strength she had in one desperate rush. She pulled once toward the barn. "Not yet," Wyatt whispered. Her eyes flashed back at him. Not anger, urgency. Orson rolled his SUV forward then, cutting across the mouth of the lane with headlights blazing. The sudden light turned the clearing stark. Barn, truck, crates, men, snow. The two workers froze. A third figure stepped out from the side door. Lyle Harrow. Even in the storm, he looked too clean for the place. Black beanie pulled low, dark jacket zipped, gloves tucked tight. His face held annoyance before it made room for concern, as if he had to choose the correct mask and fasten it under pressure. "Deputy?" he called over the wind. "Is there a problem?" Orson stepped from his SUV, one hand near his radio, not his weapon. "Evening, Lyle. Need you to stop loading." Lyle spread his arms, a performance of confusion. "We're relocating animals ahead of the storm. Roof's unsafe. I sent notice." "To whom?" "The board." "Show me." Lyle's smile tightened. "In this weather?" Orson's voice stayed slow. "In this weather." Wyatt moved behind Hannah as she came forward with her phone recording, medical bag across her shoulder. Mercy walked at his side, every step measured, every breath visible. Lyle saw the dog. For the first time, his expression failed, only for a blink. But Wyatt saw it. So did Hannah. "That's one of yours?" Orson asked. Lyle recovered. "Stray, aggressive female." "We attempted capture last week. She bolted." Mercy stood beside Wyatt, shaking with fever and exhaustion, and did not make a sound. Hannah stepped closer. "This dog is lactating, malnourished, and in active medical distress consistent with recent forced separation from a litter." Lyle looked at her as if she were an inconvenience wearing a parka. "Dr. Keene, I respect your concern, but you're not authorized to interfere with rescue operations." "No," Hannah said, "but my forged signature is very interested in your paperwork." That landed, not loudly, not like thunder, more like a blade set quietly on a table. The men near the truck stopped pretending to work. Lyle's eyes moved from Hannah to Orson. "You should be careful with accusations." "I am," Hannah said. "That's why I brought copies." The storm shoved hard against the barn. The tarp slapped the side of the truck. From inside the building came a muffled whine, then another. Mercy surged forward. Wyatt held the lead just enough to slow her, then moved with her, not against. Hannah followed, recording. Orson ordered the men to step away from the truck. One hesitated until Orson repeated it with no change in volume and a great change in meaning. They reached the barn door. This time, the lock was open. Inside, the air was worse than Wyatt remembered from outside. Old hay, disinfectant, fear, damp metal. The sourness of animals kept too long in stress. Portable lamps threw harsh light across the floor. Along one wall stood metal cages. Some were empty, some were not. German shepherds, a hound mix, a black-coated shepherd-type female, a yellow lab with eyes too tired for protest. Mothers, all of them, in one condition or another of having been used, separated, and made to wait. Some lifted their heads when the door opened. Some only watched. One pressed herself against the cage wall with a low, broken whine. Hannah's composure cracked around the eyes, but her hands stayed steady. "I need video of every cage," she said. Wyatt took her phone when she handed it to him, and she began the first rapid assessments from outside the bars. Female German shepherd, lactating, underweight, possible mastitis. Female hound mix, recent nursing signs, dehydration, shepherd-type female, paw injuries, stress response. Her voice became a ledger of suffering, not dramatic, worse, precise. Orson stood at the doorway, radioing dispatch and updating the approaching units. Lyle followed them in, anger beginning to show through the polished surface. "You are contaminating a transfer site," he said. Wyatt turned on him. "A transfer site?" "For behavioral rehabilitation," Lyle snapped. "These animals are unstable, unsuitable for public adoption. The pups require separate placement. You people have no idea what it costs to maintain animals that will never produce outcome metrics." Hannah stopped writing. Wyatt heard the phrase as if it had come from very far away. Outcome metrics. A mother pressed her nose against metal behind him. Mercy moved. She did not go to the nearest cage. She did not go toward Lyle. She did not even circle the room in panic. She pulled Wyatt past the first row, past the second, toward the rear of the barn, where the light did not reach well. There, partly hidden behind stacked feed sacks and a folded tarp, stood a final row of cages. 3 of them, 2 empty, 1 occupied. A German shepherd mother lay inside the last cage, black and gold coat dulled nearly gray by dirt and exhaustion. Her head was resting on a towel, not beside puppies, not protecting food, just a towel. Blue-edged, stained, folded badly, as if someone had removed what mattered from it and left the cloth behind as an insult. The dog's eyes opened when Mercy approached. Mercy stopped. Then she made a sound Wyatt had never heard from her before. Not a bark, not a whine. A low, cutting plea that seemed to pass beneath human language and scrape the bones of everyone in the room. The caged mother lifted her head an inch. Mercy stepped between Wyatt and the cage door. For one mad instant, Wyatt thought she was blocking him from opening it. Then he understood. She was not guarding the door against him. She was guarding the mother inside from everyone else. Hannah came up beside him, face pale. "She's critical." "Key," Wyatt said. Lyle spoke from behind them. "That dog is under transfer hold." Wyatt turned. "Key, you have no legal authority to release—" Orson's voice came from the doorway. "I do." Lyle looked back. Orson had one hand on his radio and the other held out. His face had lost all patience and none of its control. "Keys, Lyle." "This is harassment." This is an active animal cruelty investigation with probable exigent circumstances documented on video by a licensed veterinarian and witnessed by law enforcement. Orson took one step forward. "Keys." One of the workers near the truck muttered, "Man, just give him the keys." Lyle's jaw hardened. He reached into his pocket and threw the ring. It hit the floor near Wyatt's boot and skidded beneath the cage. Mercy flinched at the sound but did not move away. Wyatt crouched, retrieved the keys, and handed them to Hannah. "No," she said. "You open. Slowly. I need to keep eyes on her condition." Wyatt unlocked the cage. The door gave with a metallic groan. Mercy placed herself half in front of the opening, head low, body shaking, watching the caged mother with an attentiveness that looked almost ceremonial. Wyatt stepped back. Hannah eased forward, speaking softly. Not baby talk, not false sweetness. Just words moving gently enough not to bruise the air. The mother inside did not rise. Hannah reached in only after a long moment, touched the dog's shoulder, then her gums, then the swollen glands along her underside. "We need fluids, now." Outside, tires crunched. More vehicles, backup, animal welfare. The storm carried voices into the barn, boots in snow, radios, orders clipped short by wind. Orson moved to meet them, blocking Lyle when he tried to follow the workers toward the truck. Wyatt stayed by the last cage. Mercy leaned once toward the open door and touched the caged mother's muzzle with her nose. One touch, a greeting, a testimony. Then she turned and looked at Wyatt. He did not need to imagine words this time. He did not need myth, miracle, or meaning carved in thunder. The meaning was in the room. Open the last door. Save what can still be saved. Behind them, Lyle's voice rose. "You people think sentiment pays bills? You think the county funds this? You think donors want to hear about mothers that bite and cost money? The pups get homes. The pretty ones get trained. That is more than they'd get rotting in kennels." No one answered him at first, not because his words had power, because they were so small beside what they had entered. Hannah looked up from the weak mother in the cage. Her gloves were wet, Her face was cold and furious. "You call that rescue," she said, "because profit sounds uglier." Orson placed Lyle against the side of the truck without spectacle, reading him his rights in a steady voice nearly swallowed by wind. The two other men were separated, questioned, and kept under watch by arriving officers. The animal welfare investigator, a square-built woman with snow crusted on her hood and no patience for theater, began photographing cages and directing the removal process. No one rushed the dogs. That mattered. Cage by cage, mother by mother, they were brought out or stabilized where they lay. Hannah coordinated triage, her voice hoarse but exact. Wyatt carried blankets, held doors, blocked wind with his body, lifted only when Hannah told him to lift. He was not a soldier here, not a rescuer in the grand painted sense. He was hands, boots, weight, warmth. Once, while moving a crate from the truck, he saw papers stuffed beneath a tarp. Shipping codes, transfer sheets, lists of puppies with descriptions beside them. Black mask, strong hips, high drive, sable female, protection prospect. Beside one line, a note. Mother unsuitable, discard, transfer. Wyatt stared at the word. Discard. The storm seemed to disappear for 1 second. Then Orson took the papers from him with gloved hands and put them into an evidence bag. "Don't hold that too long," the deputy said quietly. "It'll poison you." Near the truck, the animal welfare investigator found a black tablet in Lyle's equipment bag. Hannah recognized several forms displayed on the screen before it locked, including one bearing her forged signature. Orson bagged that too. The last German Shepherd mother was carried out on a blanket stretcher, Mercy walking beside her until Hannah ordered Wyatt to take Mercy back to the truck before she collapsed. This time, Mercy obeyed. Barely. At the clearing's edge, Wyatt helped her into the rear of his truck. She turned once toward the barn. One by one, the dogs were being moved toward warmed vehicles. Some stood, some had to be carried. All of them left the barn alive. Mabel arrived near midnight in Etta's old station wagon, despite every instruction given to her by people who should have known better. Etta drove, jaw set, claiming Nash had just fed and was stable, and some fools require supervision in person. Mabel got out with her sewing book held under her coat, though Orson had already made copies and logged it. She stood in the snow beside the barn, staring at the cages being emptied. No one told her to go back. Perhaps no one dared. A yellow lab mother passed her on a blanket between two rescuers. The dog lifted her head weakly. Mabel reached out, then stopped short of touching without permission. Her hand hovered in the cold. "I wrote your name," she whispered, "not to the lab only." To all of them. Her face broke then, not loudly. Mabel did not collapse or wail or offer the storm a performance. Tears slipped down her cheeks and disappeared into the wool of her scarf. She clutched the old sewing book to her chest as if it were both shield and wound. Wyatt stood a few feet away, Mercy breathing hard behind him in the truck. He thought of Nash at the clinic, warm and fed. He thought of the blue towel, the first cry, the word abandoned written too cleanly on a form. He thought of Mercy at his cabin door, folding that towel over her son before turning back to the storm. The last cage came out empty. The barn lights flickered in the wind. Orson walked over, his hat rimmed with ice, his face more tired than triumphant. "Lyle's in custody," he said. "Others too. We've got records, animals, witnesses, video, and the truck. This will hold." Wyatt looked toward the barn. For a long moment, he did not trust himself to speak. Then Mercy, from inside the truck, gave one soft, exhausted sound. Not a cry, not a plea. A breath released. Wyatt opened the rear door and rested his hand on the blanket beside her, not touching until she leaned the smallest fraction toward him. The storm still raged. The road home was still waiting. Nash still needed his next feeding. But the locked place had been opened. And for the first time since Mercy stepped through the snow to the glass, Wyatt felt the shape of the night change. Not healed, not finished, but turned, like a door, finally, on its rusted hinges. Pine Hollow did not wake the next morning redeemed. It woke buried. Snow lay high against the church steps, against the closed doors of Oak County Animal Haven, against the old dairy barn, where yellow tape snapped in the wind, like a warning no one could pretend was decoration. Plows moved slowly through town, pushing white walls aside. Men in thick coats stood outside the bakery with coffee cups gone cold in their hands, speaking in low voices. Women at the pharmacy counter asked questions no one could answer without lowering their eyes. The rescue was closed pending investigation. That was the phrase printed on the paper taped to the front glass. It sounded clean, almost polite. It did not say that some staff members had cried in the parking lot because they had believed in the place where they worked. It did not say that donors found their old blankets in evidence photographs. It did not say that several good people in Pine Hollow had spent the morning realizing trust could be stolen and worn like a uniform. Wyatt Kincaid saw the sign once. Then he left. There were dogs alive because they had gotten there in time. That mattered more than staring at a closed door. The first week after the rescue was a week of logistics, exhaustion, and small mercies that did not look impressive from a distance. The rescued mothers were spread carefully through town. The sickest stayed at Hannah Keene's clinic under heat lamps, IV lines, and the fierce attention of a veterinarian who had not forgiven herself and had no intention of wasting that guilt. Others went to temporary foster homes approved one by one. A few were transported to a rehabilitation facility outside Maine, where staff knew how to handle animals who flinched at rolling wheels, metal doors, and men who smelled like diesel. Not all of them improved quickly. One hound mother refused food unless the bowl was placed outside the kennel, and everyone walked away. A yellow lab shook whenever a truck backed up nearby. The German shepherd from the last row of cages slept for nearly 2 days after emergency treatment, waking only to drink and stare at the nearest door as though it might vanish. No one called that progress pretty. They called it progress because it continued. Reverend Amos Bell opened the church basement before anyone officially asked. He was 67, tall in the manner of old pines rather than young soldiers, with silver hair combed back and patient blue eyes that missed very little. On Sunday mornings, he wore a white shirt and a charcoal sweater. That week, he wore work gloves, snow boots, and a brown wool coat dusted with dog hair before noon. When Mabel Quinn apologized for cluttering the church basement with crates, towels, sacks of food, medical forms, and one collapsible pen that refused to collapse politely, Amos only lifted a bag of kibble onto his shoulder. "Prayer is good," he said, carrying it downstairs. "A warm floor is prayer with its sleeves rolled up." Mabel stared after him. Then she cried for 11 seconds, blew her nose, and told him he was carrying the bag wrong. By the end of the second day, the church basement had become a supply room. Towels were sorted by size. Blankets were stacked by thickness. Mabel ran the volunteer schedule from a folding table beneath a bulletin board, usually reserved for bake sales and choir announcements. Her dark blue sewing book had been logged, copied, and returned to her in a clear evidence sleeve, which she disliked on grounds that memory should not have to wear a raincoat. No one called her troublesome now. That was some comfort. Not enough, but some. Etta Rowe handled records with the grim satisfaction of a retired woman dragged back into usefulness against her better judgment. Her red-cord reading glasses hung low on her nose as she rebuilt intake forms, matched cage numbers, corrected dates, and muttered things about how hell probably had bad filing cabinets. Deputy Orson Vale came and went with updates he shared carefully. Lyle Harrow remained in custody. The two men who had helped him were talking enough to help themselves and hurt him. There were bank transfers, private buyers, forged medical forms, rental records, more than Orson had expected, though not more than Mabel had feared. None of that healed a single dog. So most of Pine Hollow learned that justice and healing were cousins, not twins. They might arrive at the same house. They did not arrive in the same car. Wyatt learned it at the cabin. Mercy and Nash returned there under Hannah's supervision 3 days after the barn. Returned was the wrong word for Mercy, perhaps. She had never really belonged there before. She entered the cabin slowly, as she had the first time, but this time she did not stand in the doorway asking the room for permission to exist. She sniffed the hearth, the leg of the old chair, the blanket Mabel had left folded near the stove. Then she went to the corner by the kitchen, where Wyatt had arranged a thick bed, far enough from the front door and close enough to watch everything that mattered. Nash squeaked from his carrier. Mercy lowered herself beside him with a sigh that seemed older than sleep. Wyatt stood in the middle of the cabin, holding a bag of medication in one hand and a feeding chart in the other. He had faced worse supplies with less fear. Ammunition, climbing gear, medical packs, maps with bad roads and worse borders. Yet nothing had ever humbled him quite like a bottle warmer, 3 syringes, a probiotic paste, and Hannah's written instruction. Do not improvise unless you call me first. He did not improvise. He called twice the first evening. The second call was because Nash sneezed. Happens, Hannah said. It was a strong sneeze. Congratulations, you have a puppy with ambition. He looked at Nash, who was asleep with milk on his chin. Should I wipe it? Wyatt. Yes. Breathe? That became the work after the dramatic part ended. Breathe. Warm the bottle. Set Mercy's bowl down and step back. Let her choose the corner. Let her sleep. Do not touch the wrapped paws unless needed. Do not turn every flinch into a failure. Do not make safety loud. For a man who had spent much of his life believing danger required action, Wyatt found stillness harder than the barn. Mercy did not trust the cabin all at once. The first time a logging truck passed on the distant road, she rose so quickly, Nash rolled against the blanket with an offended grunt. Wyatt started toward her, then stopped. He remembered Hannah's voice. He remembered Mercy at the barn, choosing for herself where to stand. So he lowered himself onto the kitchen floor sideways, not facing her directly, and waited. Mercy paced once, then twice. Then she returned to Nash. Wyatt did not praise her. He did not reach. He let the quiet receive her. That was harder than praise. Over the next weeks, the cabin changed in ways Wyatt could not have planned and therefore could not properly resist. A towel stayed on the floor near the stove because Nash liked to wedge his nose into its folds and fall asleep as if he had defeated it in battle. A water bowl appeared by the kitchen island, then another in the hallway because Mercy preferred drinking where she could see the door. A calendar from Hannah's clinic hung on the refrigerator, covered in weight checks, medication times, and one note from Mabel that read, "Stop writing like you're reporting to Congress." 8 well is sufficient. Wyatt did not remove it. Mercy grew stronger slowly. Her coat began to recover its gold under the grime and thinness, the black saddle across her back no longer looking like a burned cloak, but like something weathered and returning. The small tear in her left ear remained. The pale arrow of fur down her face became clearer each time Mabel brushed her, though brushing required negotiation, patience, and once a bribe involving boiled chicken that Mabel claimed was not bribery, but diplomacy with protein. Nash grew with less dignity. He went from blind, warmth-seeking creature to round-bellied monarch of the hearth. His paws remained too large, his ears remained undecided, and his confidence often exceeded the laws of balance. He learned to crawl, then wobble, then launch himself at Wyatt's bootlace with the solemn commitment of a knight attacking a dragon. One afternoon, he seized the lace, pulled once, and promptly fell asleep with it in his mouth. Wyatt stood over him for nearly a minute. Mercy watched from the rug. The old Wyatt would have moved the boot, straightened the lace, restored order. This Wyatt left it there. When Hannah arrived for a checkup and found him walking through the cabin in one boot because the other had been claimed by a sleeping puppy, she leaned against the doorway and smiled. "You know," she said, "there are people who would call that surrender." Wyatt looked at Nash. "Strategic withdrawal." "Mm-hmm." Mercy lifted her head as if judging them both. By the 4th week, the question of adoption came officially. It did not arrive with violins. It arrived in Hannah's practical handwriting on a form placed on Wyatt's kitchen table beside a mug of coffee and a plate of Mabel's biscuits that were either slightly overbaked or designed for structural use. "You are still allowed to say no," Hannah said. Wyatt looked at her. She had come in a cream sweater under her quilted jacket, clinic fatigue still under her eyes, but less sharp than before. Her red wine stethoscope was tucked in her bag instead of around her neck. For once she looked like a person visiting a house, not a doctor stepping into a crisis. "Are they ready?" he asked. Hannah's expression softened in a way he almost missed. "That is exactly the question I hoped you'd ask." He looked toward the hearth. Mercy lay with Nash tucked against her belly. She no longer curled around him as if the world might reach through the walls and steal him. Sometimes she slept with her head down now. Sometimes she left him with Wyatt long enough to drink water in the hallway. Once she had stepped onto the porch, sniffed the cold, and come back inside without trembling. No miracle. Better. Practice. Wyatt signed. His hand did not shake, though something inside him did. The form did not heal Elise's absence. It did not bring back the canine whose silence still entered his dreams on hard nights. It did not make Wyatt whole in any of the cheap ways people promised wholeness to the wounded. It did something smaller. It gave his care a name. After that, the work widened. The network began by accident, as most useful things do. The church basement had supplies. Hannah had medical records. Etta had systems. Orson had contacts. Mabel had volunteers, towels, and an ability to terrify disorganized compassion into spreadsheets. Reverend Amos had space, coffee, and a belief that Grace should have a mop bucket nearby. Wyatt had the cabin. He did not offer it publicly. He did not hang a sign or make a speech. He simply told Hannah that if there was a mother dog, an old dog, or a frightened animal who needed quiet before moving on, his back room could be warmed. Then he repaired the shed behind the cabin, insulated the walls, installed safe heat, built 2 kennels with doors that latched gently instead of clanging, and labeled every hook and shelf until Mabel accused him of flirting with order. "I'm maintaining standards," he said. "You alphabetized blankets by emotional thickness. That was your term. And you respected it, which is why there may be hope for you." The first temporary dog to stay after Mercy was not a German shepherd, but an old spaniel with cloudy eyes and a distrust of tile floors. Mercy tolerated him from a distance. Nash tried to befriend his tail and was ignored with historic firmness. Wyatt learned that rescue did not always announce itself with storm and scandal. Sometimes it arrived as a dog who needed 3 days to cross a room. Pine Hollow learned too. People came quietly at first, ashamed perhaps. A retired teacher brought towels. The pharmacist donated pill organizers for medication schedules. Caleb Mercer fixed the church basement heater and refused payment, saying the town had already paid enough for not looking closely. Orson brought coffee and case updates when he could, never saying more than allowed, never less than needed. The rescue building remained closed. Maybe it would reopen one day under new leadership, maybe not. No one rushed that question. Trust, once stolen, did not return because a sign was repainted. Near the end of March, snow still clung to the shaded side of the road, but the light had changed. It came earlier, stayed longer, and touched the tops of the spruce trees with a softness winter could not quite forbid. That morning Wyatt stepped onto the porch, carrying Nash in the blue towel. The towel was different now. Mabel had patched one worn corner with white thread and stitched a small crooked star near the edge. She claimed the star was intentional. Wyatt suspected it had begun as a repair and become theology. Nash had grown heavy enough that carrying him required shifting his weight against one arm. His eyes were open now, dark and curious, his small black muzzle damp from investigating every sleeve, finger, and morally suspicious piece of furniture in the house. One ear had begun to lift at the base, while the other remained soft and foolish. Mercy came out beside Wyatt. She stood close to his leg, not leaning, but near. Her coat caught the pale morning, black and gold returning under the scars of winter. Her torn ear tipped into the breeze. The arrow mark down her face pointed toward the yard, the trees, the world she had crossed when she had been nothing but bones, milk, and will. Across town, the church bell rang. Clear, not mournful, not triumphant, simply awake. Wyatt looked toward the sound. Beyond the trees, Pine Hollow was beginning another day. A town with shame in its recent past, snow in its gutters, and people trying imperfectly to become worthy of the animals who had trusted them. Nash squirmed in the towel. Mercy turned her head at once. Wyatt lowered the puppy enough for her to sniff him. She touched his head with her nose, gentle as the first day in the parking lot, but without the terror that had lived in that gesture then. Nash pawed at her muzzle. Mercy endured it with the grave patience of a mother saint and the faint expression of a dog reconsidering motherhood's marketing materials. Wyatt laughed. The sound startled him. It did not start as much. A breath, maybe, a rough note in the cold. But it was laughter all the same, and Mercy glanced up as if cataloging this new behavior. He had not been returned to the man he was before. That man belonged to another season, another house, another kitchen, where Elise sang badly and burned toast with heroic optimism. The old K9 was not waiting by the door. The past had not been restored like a broken chair repaired so cleverly no one could see the crack. The crack remained, but light had found it. Wyatt held Nash against his chest and rested one hand lightly on Mercy's head. She allowed it. Not because she had forgotten what hands could do, because she had learned what his hands chose. Inside the cabin, the hearth waited. Towels hung by the stove. A feeding chart remained on the refrigerator, though Nash no longer needed it. Mercy's bowl sat where she preferred it, with a clear view of the door. Wyatt's old boots lay slightly crooked on the mat because last night Nash had fallen asleep against one of them, and Wyatt had chosen not to move it. A small surrender, a large salvation. He looked out at the snow-bright trees and understood something without needing to say it aloud. God had not given Elise back. God had not given back the dog lost years ago under a sky Wyatt still dreamed of. But into the long cold afterward there had come a puppy wrapped in blue, no heavier than a promise. Then a mother through the snow, carrying grief like a crown. Then an old woman with a sewing book, a doctor with steady hands, a deputy with a pencil, a pastor with a warm basement, and a town learning that mercy was not a feeling. Mercy was work. Mercy was record-keeping. Mercy was opening the last cage. Mercy was letting a frightened creature choose where to sleep. Mercy was leaving the bootlace where the puppy had conquered it. The bell rang once more. Nash sighed. Mercy stood at Wyatt's side, alive and watchful, while the morning brightened over Pine Hollow. And in the cabin behind them, where silence had once sat like a frozen altar, 2 small heartbeats waited by the fire, calling an old soldier back, not to who he had been, but to the life still asking for his hands. Sometimes mercy does not arrive as a grand miracle. Sometimes it comes as a small cry in a blue towel, a mother standing in the snow, or a door we are afraid to open. Wyatt could have kept his own little warmth and turned away from the storm. But love asked more of him. It asked him to protect not only what was already in his arms, but also what was still waiting behind the last locked door. Maybe that is where grace often meets us too, in the ordinary choice to notice, to care, and to do the right thing when looking away would be easier. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories of loyalty, faith, and second chances still matter, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one. May your home be warm, your heart be steady, and may God give you courage for the doors you are meant to open.